The combined win streak for the two people in the main event of UFC 315, Belal Muhammad, the welterweight champion of the world, Jack Della Maddalena, the 5th ranked welterweight in the world, 27 consecutive wins in a row. Belal Muhammad not lost a fight in 6 years. Jack Della Maddalena not lost a fight in 9 years. These guys quite literally don't know what it's like to lose. At least they don't remember what it's like to lose. But someone is going to be reminded this Saturday in the main event of UFC 315. Ever since Belal Muhammad's no contest to Leon Edwards back in March of 2021, he's won 6 consecutive fights, and all 6 of them have been against a killer's row of competition, especially relevant to where and when the fight actually happened. It started with Damian Maia, then we move on to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, both of them title challengers in the past. Vicente Luque, Sean Brady, who was undefeated at the time, Gilbert Burns, who had challenged for a title in the past, and then Belal Muhammad would stop the win streak of Leon Edwards, avenge the not lost but weird no contest 3 years prior, and in July of last year in Manchester, England, Belal Muhammad would dethrone Leon Edwards. He would end his title reign and become the new welterweight champion of the world. And while his age of 36 may not be the prime years that we're used to seeing people become champion in, it is clear that Belal Muhammad, fight by fight, continues to get better and better and showing evolutions in his skill sets, even if it's just slight tweaks here and there. Look at this fight with Leon Edwards where he outstruck one of the most dangerous technical kickboxers in the welterweight division. And on top of his evolving skill sets in the striking and stand-up realm, his grappling, his wrestling, and the pressure and pace in which he puts on his opponents is second to none in maybe the entirety of all of the UFC, and especially in this 170-pound division. So what holds up something like Belal Muhammad back? All of these victories in a row against high-level competition, becoming the champion. Well, many people say he is quote-unquote boring, as 18 of his 24 victories have come by way of decision, including 5 of the last 6 during the win streak that I just mentioned. And while yes, he isn't the most exciting fighter I've ever seen in my life, I wouldn't necessarily go to the stretches of saying he's boring. He is just dominant. Literally, none of these fights over the past 6 against the best level competition that he's faced have been close. The only moments that were close were for Leon Edwards in the 5th and final round of their fight, and that was with 30 seconds to go, where he landed an elbow on the ground and sliced Belal open. Outside of that, Belal Muhammad has not looked vulnerable whatsoever. And so all of this high-level experience, all of the momentum, gold wrapped around his waist. What does Teddy Atlas say? Once you become champion, you instantly become 30% better. We're going to find out this upcoming Saturday because, yes, all of the momentum and wins are on the side of Belal Muhammad being the new champion, but last year was not necessarily a great year for Belal. Yes, he became the new champ, but then he was slated to fight in December against Shavkat Rakhmonov and make the first defense of his title, but he would succumb to a very nasty toe infection that would kind of spread throughout his body and put his life in danger. He had to go 6 consecutive weeks without any physical movement or workouts whatsoever. Now he's back in the gym, ready to roll here in May, nearly 6 months removed from that infection. Is he recovered enough? Can he show that he has made those 30% improvements and put it on full display against an ultra-dangerous up-and-comer that has been catapulted into title contention? Jackie Moon, Jack Della Maddalena, 3-name Jack. Should I keep naming nicknames? As a matter of fact, I can. JDM has gone 7-0 in the UFC thus far after having an absolute banger on the Contender Series that I can still remember to this day that happened back in September of 2021. One of the best fights in Dana White Contender Series history against Ange Losa. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch that fight. And then he would keep that momentum going from the barn burner that he had on DWCS by starting his UFC career with 4 consecutive finishes, all of them in the first round, including a win over Randy Brown back in February of 2023. But the remainder of 2023 wouldn't be as successful and awe-inspiring as how his UFC career started, because he would take on short notice replacement Basil Hafez in July of that year, where he would absolutely be taken to the brink and nearly be finished in that fight, where he would edge out a very close split decision over the UFC newcomer at that time. And then in September of 2023, he would take on Kevin Holland in another razor close fight, but he would get the nod via split decision for the second straight time. And really, the momentum, or lack thereof, should I say, didn't really carry over into 2024 either for Jack Della Maddalena, because he fought Gilbert Burns at UFC 299, and while he did pull off the victory, it did not come easy. As a matter of fact, I believe it won the UFC Honors Award for Comeback of the Year in a fight that he was losing 2-0 going into round 3, more than likely was losing that third round, but then he turned the tide and got the late finish 3 minutes and 43 seconds into that third and final round via KO that started with knees to the body, finished it with elbows on the ground over the former title challenger Gilbert Durinho Burns. He would be out of action for the remainder of 2024. I believe he broke his arm in that fight against Gilbert, wasn't really able to get it recovered in time to fight by the end of the year. And then we saw what happened in December. I just mentioned Belal Muhammad could not fight due to the infection. Shavkat Rakhmonov instead faced Ian Machado Gary, where he would beat Gary and remain undefeated. That was then aligning for him to get the title shot against Belal. Obviously not in December, but in May this weekend at UFC 315. However, Shavkat Rakhmonov has suffered a knee injury that sidelined him until probably late into 2025. But before we learned of that injury for Shavkat, Jack Della Maddalena was slated to main event in London against the former champion Leon Edwards. Instead, the UFC called Jackie Moon's number and set him up here for the title fight with Belal Muhammad. Then we would see Sean Brady step in on short notice to fight Leon at UFC London, where he would dominate him and get the finish late into that fight, where you could probably argue he should get the winner of this if it wasn't for the undefeated Shavkat Rakhmonov. But I digress. Do you see all of the pieces that had to fall to get us to where we are today? Jack Della Maddalena, number 5, Belal Muhammad, champion. Someone's win streak must come to an end. We talked about the win streak for Belal, and for Jack Della, he started his pro career 0-2, both of those losses in 2016, and has not looked back since. 17 consecutive victories, with 14 of them coming by way of stoppage, and 12 of those 14 by way of knockout. Jack Della is one of the best strikers in the welterweight division, and definitely, maybe even is the best pure boxer in the 170-pound division. But that isn't stopping Belal Muhammad from making some pretty bold claims.
I'm going to break him. I'm going to fold him. He's going to go down in 3.
And saying that he will stand and strike with Jack Della Maddalena. He will outbox him, and he will make him route to plan B. And what is his plan B, Belal Muhammad says? It's to shoot for takedowns, it's to pull for guard, and that's not what you want to do against someone like Belal Muhammad, who is known for his grappling, top pressure, and his wrestling. Is it an uphill battle for one of my favorite fighters, Jack Della Maddalena, to become the champion? It absolutely is. He will have to show massive evolutions in his skill set since the last time we've seen him in March of 2024. And granted, that is quite a bit of time. As a matter of fact, it's 14 full months of training and getting prepared for fights against Leon Edwards and now against Belal Muhammad. Yes, I understand he was injured for some months during that portion of time, but nevertheless, that's a lot of time to make a lot of improvements. It's a lot of time to watch tape on the best welterweight in the world, Belal Muhammad. Is that 14-month time period going to be enough for Jack Della Maddalena to end the 10-fight win streak, 11-fight unbeaten streak of Belal Muhammad? That's the question that I'm unsure if he'll be able to answer. But if he can, if he gets that belt wrapped around his waist this Saturday, it will be a massive upset and a big time storyline for Australia. And for Belal Muhammad, he continues to build his legacy should he defend his title for the first time. Obviously, in terms of title defenses, he's nowhere close to where Kamaru Usman was with, 5 or 6, and then he wasn't even close to where George St. Pierre was with, I believe, 9 or 10 title defenses. But Belal Muhammad's win streak, Belal Muhammad's resume is beginning to stack up with George St. Pierre with Kamaru Usman. So while yes, he maybe won't get to the point of the title defense records, his resume can be very, very loaded by the time he decides to call it a career. Not to mention he has pretty big aspirations of potentially becoming a double champion like someone in George St. Pierre who reigned in this division for many, many years when he came back from a multi-year hiatus to take down Michael Bisping to become the middleweight champion back in 2017. But first, Belal must take care of Jack Della Maddalena, and then we will discuss what is next for the welterweight champion of the world. I'm very interested to hear what you all think of this fight. Do you think Jack Della Maddalena stands a chance, as he is currently plus 145 as the underdog entering this fight, with Belal Muhammad as the favorite at minus 175, which is some pretty significant line movement because on Monday, when I started gathering my information for the podcast, Belal Muhammad was around a minus 205 favorite. So the line is closing just a bit, but does that mean anything, or is that just bettors betting against their distaste of Belal Muhammad? I'll say this, if Jack Della Maddalena can keep the fight standing, I think things will get very interesting. Don't get me wrong, Belal Muhammad, as I've already gave him flowers for, has made massive jumps and leaps and improvements in his striking. But are those jumps good enough to compete with someone as crisp in the boxing realm as JDM? I don't quite think so. So if Jack does keep this fight standing and keeps it at a distance, can keep Belal Muhammad on the outside of his strikes rather than getting pressed up against the fence, Jack could find some pretty big success in this fight. But the deeper that this fight goes into rounds 3, into rounds 4, into round number 5, should we get there, the tide will turn for Belal Muhammad, who doesn't get tired as these fights go on, as he is showcased time and time again. And so, if the fight continues to go longer and longer and Belal can pressure and wilt Jack Della Maddalena down, he will land those takedowns. He will be able to keep him down. And dare I say, I think a finish comes in this fight regardless of who the winner is. I think Jack Della Maddalena either finds the chin of Belal Muhammad before the takedowns become too much, or Belal Muhammad survives on the feet, competes better in the stand-up than what I'm even projecting him to do, and as the fight goes on in the later rounds, he will get Jack down and finish him with strikes or maybe even a submission. So give me all of your thoughts and your predictions for this main event down in the comments below. Will Belal Muhammad successfully defend his title for the first time and make his win streak 11? Or will Jack Della Maddalena, in the momentum of Belal Muhammad, extend his own win streak to 18 and become the new welterweight champion of the world, the first ever to hail from Australia in the 170-pound weight class? And now that we are done with the main event discussion, let's jump into a very intriguing flyweight title fight in the co-main event between Valentina Shevchenko and Manon Fiorot. The Bullet versus the Beast. I feel like this is one of the more long-awaited title shots in the flyweight division that we've seen in quite some time. Valentina Shevchenko, the two-time now flyweight champion after regaining her throne at Noche UFC last September, versus Manon Fiorot, who has looked incredible. Nothing short of perfection, as a matter of fact, since joining the UFC just a few short years ago. For Valentina, we all know her story. We've seen her time and time again over the course of this podcast and over the course of her near decade-long career in the UFC at this point. She started her career down at bantamweight, where she would go 3-2 with the only losses coming to the greatest women's fighter of all time in Amanda Nunes, before transitioning to the 125-pound division and truly kind of just starting that division herself against Priscilla Cachoeira back in February of 2018, and that is where her reign of terror began. She would tally off 9 consecutive fights to start her flyweight career, with 5 of them coming by way of stoppage and 7 consecutive championship defenses. But that reign would come to an end in March of 2023, where Alexa Grasso would shock the world as a plus 600 or more favorite, depending on what sportsbook you bet on, by submitting the Bullet in the 4th round of their championship fight to become the new champion. Then we would see them fight a second time in September of that same year, where they would fight to a draw, and then the trilogy bout, the 3rd fight we would see in September of last year, 1 year removed from their middle fight, where Valentina would dominate Alexa Grasso to regain her title. But she didn't technically win the trilogy because it's 1, 1, and 1 draw. So maybe down the line we will see that fourth fight, especially if Alexa Grasso wins this coming weekend as well, but that's a discussion for the next video. So now Valentina will look to defend her title for the first time of this championship reign and the 8th time overall, and continue to solidify her legacy and chase that greatest female fighter of all time moniker that is currently held by the GOAT Amanda Nunes. And much like the discussion around Belal Muhammad in the main event, Valentina, fight by fight, has shown so many evolutions in her game, but in the opposite way that Belal has. For Belal, he came into the UFC known for his wrestling and his grappling. For Valentina, she came in as a world-class Muay Thai and kickboxing practitioner, and over the course of her UFC career has really garnered an attention for the grappling and wrestling in her own right, and has become one of the best wrestlers in the entire flyweight division. As a matter of fact, if you didn't watch the fight last September, that's how she dominated Alexa Grasso. I can't even count how many takedowns she had in that fight, nor the minutes of control time that she had. And she doesn't just hold her opponents down, she looks to inflict damage with her strikes. She looks to threaten with submission. She gets her opponents in the full mount. She gets her opponents locked up in the crucifix position. She just is very good at holding top control, and that's something that we really haven't seen Manon Fiorot face so far in her UFC career. Because like Valentina, Manon is an electric striker, although a bit differently, as she has a very accredited karate background prior to joining the UFC, and very similar to the main event between both combatants, Belal and Della Maddalena, Manon Fiorot has won 12 consecutive fights, hasn't lost a fight since her professional MMA debut, as a matter of fact, that came in June of 2018 in Cage Warriors, has since tallied off 12 consecutive fights, and is 7-0 in the UFC, and her resume, I don't think gets talked about enough. She finished Tabitha Ricci, although that wasn't Tabitha's true weight class at 125. We know that she's a ranked strawweight, but still a great victory. And then look at this. Mayra Bueno Silva, former bantamweight title challenger. Jennifer Maia, former title challenger at flyweight. Caitlin Sermonara, former title challenger. Rose Namajunas, former 2-time strawweight champion, and Erin Blanchfield, who heading into that fight with Manon, both of them were 6-0 in the UFC. So she halted Erin's momentum and her win streak and reigned supreme as the true blue blood prospect in this division. And now she gets the opportunity to beat the second greatest female mixed martial artist of all time. And not only does she have the opportunity to make history and dethrone Valentina, but she's favored to do so on DraftKings Sportsbook. At the moment I'm recording this on Wednesday, May 7th, she is a -142 favorite, with Valentina coming in as the champion, but on the comeback at +120, the underdog. And if that line stays where it is, I'm sorry, Manon, it's nothing against you, but if I'm getting Valentina at plus money, I have to take it. It's just out of principle. But it's not impossible to think that Manon Fiorot can get the victory here. After all, Valentina is 37 years old, and she's not getting any younger. But to be fair, Manon Fiorot isn't like a young prospect like Erin Blanchfield. She's actually a 35-year-old prospect. And it's crazy to say this, but if Valentina stays standing with Manon, I'm not sure if she'll be able to get the job done. I think Valentina is going to have to implement her grappling and wrestling in order to find the most success, ensure her best path to victory. And as I said, for Manon Fiorot, we really haven't seen her have to get tested all that much in the grappling realm. Some of the most that we've seen her get tested was against Jennifer Maia, but in that fight, she actually displayed quite a pretty good offensive grappling skill set. But I don't see her implementing that same type of game plan here against Valentina. I think she's going to want to keep this fight at range like she is so good at doing and has shown time and time again in her brief UFC career so far. And if she can, Valentina may have an uphill battle here. And I want to lean on that side of Valentina and all of the high-level experience that she has against some of the best women of all time in the UFC. But Manon, look at the resume that I just listed off. She's not fighting just people that are thrown at her. She's fighting some of the best fighters in the world in her own right. I think we're going to see an extremely high-level mixed martial arts bout here, and I think it's going to turn into what I feel is a chess match where the slightest mistakes are going to pay dividends for the winner and the biggest discrepancies for the loser. Valentina can't afford to make a mistake like she did against Alexa Grasso, where she went for that spinning back fist where Alexa took her back and submitted her. Valentina will have to fight very methodically here in order to get a victory over someone who fights as clean, as technical, and as polished as Manon Fiorot. And the same can be said for Manon. If she takes one false step, she makes one wrong move on the feet, Valentina will take advantage of that like she has done time and time again and get this fight to the ground. And if she can get Manon down there and gets heavy on top, I don't know if Manon can get up. If she does, she will display something that we haven't really seen her display before. I am very excited for this fight. It is very highly anticipated. It's long awaited for Manon to get this championship fight because that fight against Erin Blanchfield came last March. So we're talking a 14-month hiatus here for Manon Fiorot with no action, whereas Valentina has been relatively active and just fought last September. You pair that with the high-level stakes in the featured bout on this fight card with Alexa Grasso, number 1, the former champion, and the surging Natalia Silva, who I feel is all but certain to be a UFC champion before she calls it a career. This is a very important fight for this flyweight division that is starting to pick up momentum in 2025. We've got the title fight. We've got the number 1 contender fight. We've got number 3 versus number 4, Erin Blanchfield and Macy Barber at the end of May. Not to mention a strawweight champion chomping at the bit to make her debut at flyweight. Zhang Weili has a very close eye on the winner of this flyweight championship fight. You can bet your ass. So with all of these storylines surrounding this fight, the legacy that Valentina holds, the potential legacy that Manon Fiorot can continue to build, it has all the makings of a massive, pivotal moment in the women's flyweight division's history for the UFC, and I want to hear what you have to think about my thoughts on this card and give me your predictions as well down in the comments below. Will Valentina get her 8th championship title defense, the first of her second reign, or will Manon Fiorot remain perfect in the UFC and dethrone the second greatest female mixed martial artist the UFC has ever seen? That's it. Now all we have to do is tune in Saturday evening for the championship fights. Belal Muhammad, Jack Della Maddalena, 27 fight win streak combined. Valentina Shevchenko, 2-time champion, 7 title defenses versus Manon Fiorot, a 12-fight win streak, 7-0 in the UFC. A lot of people have been hating on UFC 315, but that won't be me. You won't be finding me hating on this card. I'm actually ecstatic for this card and the rest of the fights to follow. So if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to tune in because there's going to be a separate video breaking down all of the rest of the best fights on the card. But for this video, drop your predictions down in the comments below for both championship fights, as well as your thoughts on my breakdowns and what you think is in store for both the welterweight and women's flyweight divisions in the aftermath of UFC 315. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Every single week I preview and break down the biggest and best fights and talk about what is at stake and all of the best storylines. I also recap the most meaningful results each card, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow along on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes release there. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you in the next video.